Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Thank you for coming to learn about the value of wetlands and about what we are doing to protect our wetlands here in Cape Coral. We have a very, very good turnout here today. We must have lots of concerns. Those concerns are justified. We have 3 speakers for you tonight. We have a primary speaker, whom I will introduce in just a moment. Then we will have 2 secondary speakers. There will be Q&A periods after each speaker. We want everyone to ask your questions. We want to address them. We want everyone going home with a good grasp of what is happening in the wetlands south of Rotary Park. So, getting right to it, we are very happy and fortunate tonight to have with us a regional authority on the value of wetlands. That is Mr. Matt DePalis, and he is the Environmental Policy Director for the Sanibel Captiva Conservation Foundation, one of the most reputable and influential environmental organizations in Southwest Florida. Matt has a master's degree in marine biology and a Juris Doctorate with certificates in both environmental and ocean and coastal law from the University of Oregon. So please welcome Matt.
Thank you, Joe. It's great to be here tonight. Great to be talking to a room full of people who clearly care so much about their community. I'm going to move through a little history of wetlands and talk about wetlands in the area and some of the other things that I see in my role with SCCF. A little bit of background. Sanibel Captiva Conservation Foundation started as a land trust about 50 years ago. Since then, we've grown into a much larger organization. We have a working marine lab that does a lot of water monitoring, water quality monitoring, seagrass monitoring. We have volunteer arms that engage in mangrove cleanups, coastal restoration projects, oyster reef restoration projects. We have the Sanibel Sea School that's involved in bringing children out into the resource and getting them excited about the ocean so they can carry that with them throughout the rest of their lives. We have the policy department, that's me, and we engage basically all over the state. We have a native plant center. We do a lot of trail maintenance and habitat maintenance. And all of that in the larger goal of protecting and caring for Southwest Florida's coastal ecosystems. So when asked what you can do to protect the coastal ecosystems of your home and your community, I think the number one thing that we can do is really protect the remaining wetlands that we have. Wetlands are so important, as we'll talk about tonight, and I'm sure the next speakers will discuss as well. But wetlands are really this unique resource that we have here in not just in Florida, but they're unique in the way that they completely protect us in the same way that we protect them. So, just to give some very basic background, we're going to start at the bottom and work up. Wetlands are distinct ecosystems that are flooded or saturated by water. So this can look very different depending on where you are in the world, where you are in Florida, but we have a lot of mangrove ecosystems is what we generally think of in this area that provide those storm buffer and a lot of other natural ecosystem services when we're discussing wetlands. So over 31% of Florida is wetland. That's a big number. When we're thinking about Florida, Florida is a very, very flat state. It doesn't take a lot to override the land there. And so when we're talking about things like saltwater intrusion into the mainland aquifers, when we're talking about sea level rise, and when we're talking about storm surge, it doesn't take much to really impact our communities and where we have chosen to live. So it's really important to know that when we're talking about our wetlands and also know what we need to fight to protect because there aren't that much of them left. This is a heat map of the Caloosahatchee watershed, and all of those white areas that you see, those are wetlands that exist today in the watershed of the Caloosahatchee. So just to orient you, here's Pine Island, and this is the Caloosahatchee running from Lake Okeechobee right here. And what you see down here in this big area that doesn't have much white on it is Cape Coral. So Cape Coral, where we're standing today, used to be almost exclusively wetlands before dredges were brought to Florida, before canals were a thing, and before people started flocking here. This was mostly wetland, and when we're talking on a geologic time scale, everything that we've done to develop Florida since the 50s, since before the 50s, is really minuscule on the grand scheme of things. So when given an opportunity, water is going to want to return to the areas that it used to go to, because that's the way that this entire area geologically evolved over time. So when we are thinking about why are we having flooding now, why is water showing up in places where we don't want water? Well, it's actually us who built a house in a place that's very susceptible to flooding, and now we don't see it every day because we've canaled and we've dredged and ditched and drained. But when a lot of water comes in, it will absolutely find those old hydrologic beds that it used to subsist in, and we saw that in Ian, and we see that in other parts of the state just in sunny day flooding, where we're having more and more water than we know what to do with. So wetlands do provide an outsized benefit to the surrounding areas. This is something that was on full display during Ian. And when we think about wetlands, we think about the storm protection a lot. But they do more than just provide a buffer for the water. They actually hold the water on the land. When you have these complicated systems, whether it's a mangrove wetland or a salt marsh or any of these areas where water is able to sit, they essentially function as a sponge and are able to suck up and hold water in ways that concrete parking lots just can't. They provide water filtration, which is so important to our area. We're talking right now in North Cape Coral, North Fort Myers about slowing or cutting off water supply, not using it for irrigation. And this is because we're using water at a faster rate than it's being replenished. And one of the major ways we replenish water is through our wetlands, allowing it to percolate through the limestone bedrock into the aquifers below. And so there's all these other resources associated with wetlands that we don't think about in our daily lives, and it's really, really difficult to put a dollar amount on them. And this is a conversation I was having just before this talk. This is a conversation I have probably weekly with people, is how do we value a mangrove? How do we value a wetland? And when you think about it and expand the window and talk about all of the different resources that are provided by a wetland, suddenly that dollar amount starts to increase astronomically above just the price of the land or the price of the tree that's sitting there. It provides habitat for a lot of species, really important threatened species like small-toothed sawfish exist in our estuaries here, but also as rookeries for traveling migrating birds, for raccoons and otters and all these other fur bearers that don't have many other places to go in Lee County, especially in Cape Coral where a lot of the green space is gone. And this all increases biodiversity, which is such an important thing to focus on in today, especially as we're talking about the rampant development. The interconnectivity of nature is something that's really, really being lost. So anything we can do to increase biodiversity makes our entire ecosystem more robust, and that's going to not only improve the lives of those animals, but also increase the amount of different animals you see, different birds you see. That's going to bring tourism for people who want to see those animals. It increases the health of our fisheries and our estuaries. And so you see these knock-on effects when you protect a wetland that expand to beyond just that wetland in itself. And then there's other things that we don't necessarily think about, as the climate is changing, we're having all these other pressures put on us as a society, as a civilization, and things like heat absorption that don't necessarily jump to mind, but when we're having record high heat year after year, to the point that it's dangerous to go outside, a lot of that is exacerbated by putting down rooftops, putting down asphalt, putting down concrete, and removing a lot of these plants that otherwise would be absorbing and holding that heat. Instead, it's reflecting, and it can create these heat islands that are really dangerous for wildlife and humans. So just an idea of where Lee County is. From 1999 to 2019, we were tracking wetland loss, and you can see that this green line started out above the red line. The green line is wetlands, and the red line is development. And those crossed over right in the mid-2000s and have skyrocketed. And you can see every other land use basically has remained unchanged in Lee County. And what that means is that we're developing, and we're developing pretty exclusively in wetlands. And this is hugely detrimental to the county for a lot of those reasons that I just discussed. So when we're talking about wetlands, a lot of the times in Lee County here, we're talking about mangroves. Mangroves are one of the most amazing plants that I've ever encountered. They provide a huge buffer for storms. They have this super complex prop root system that allows them to grow up out of the sediment, out of the water. They have tidal flushing of the root system, and they grow into these hugely complex systems that provide a lot of benefits, not only to the people that live around them, not only to the animals that enjoy them, but outsized benefit to our whole community. So storm surge is something that we all think of when we think of mangroves. That's the immediate benefit that jumps to mind. I'm sure many people have seen a similar graph or a similar drawing to this, where when you have complex reef systems and mangroves and dunes, the wave height is actually attenuated by those mangroves. But without any of those natural features, you have huge storm surge that causes a lot of damage. And we saw that on full display during Ian last year, where these areas that had protective wetlands, that had protective mangrove fringes and natural dune buffers and oyster reefs, didn't suffer the same kind of catastrophic damage that we saw in areas that were developed right up to the coastline. That's not to say there was no damage. Everyone experienced a ton of damage throughout Ian, but I can say, especially on Sanibel, without our native systems that we had protecting us, the damage would have been a lot worse. Storm surge attenuation is a huge issue. Wind attenuation is also something that's not necessarily immediately thought of, but the complex root system, the prop roots and the branches all form essentially a complex wall that is able to individually absorb the energy. And the energy absorption is really, really key here, because when we're talking about infrastructure, whether it's nature-based infrastructure like using mangroves, or gray-green is a mix of it, or just gray infrastructure like a seawall, the difference that you get between a mangrove and a seawall is that energy absorption. A mangrove, when it's hit by a storm surge, that energy is dissipated through the branches, through the prop roots, and that energy actually leaves the system. Whereas when you have a seawall, that energy has to go somewhere. You're passing it off to your neighbors, or you're scouring out the bottom of your seawall. So we saw that on full display in Fort Myers Beach, where some seawalls were built, some people didn't have seawalls, and that funneled the water into areas that made it so much more devastating than it otherwise would have. So having a seawall essentially just starts an arm race, because the minute your neighbor has a seawall, you have to build a seawall that's as big or bigger if you don't want to get overtopped. Whereas mangrove systems can come in and actually transfer that, or absorb that damaging power into themselves, protecting whatever's behind them. Sediment trapping is really important as we're talking about sea level rise specifically, but generally just erosion as well. The prop roots of a mangrove system actually trap sediment, and they'll continue to build upon themselves, increasing the amount of land that's available. Whereas once you build a seawall, some of that gray infrastructure, that's it. Wherever you drew the line, that's where that line is going to be until you improve that seawall or build a new one. Nutrient cycling is really important, not something that we're really at risk of, since most of our water here is polluted for nutrients. We have a ton of phosphorus and nitrogen in our watershed that we don't need. But in areas where we don't have huge fertilizer applications, we don't have septic, we don't have golf courses, a lot of that nutrient for the environment is provided by mangroves in the form of foliage falling down out of those trees. And even rookeries that use these areas can then deposit a lot of nutrients from the bird effluent into the water. Habitat, as I mentioned before, for both fisheries, juvenile fish love mangrove prop roots. That's where they do a lot of their hunting before they head out and become fishable and attracting tourists to us. But also birds use them as rookeries a lot. And then a debris buffer is something that we saw also during Ian that isn't necessarily something you think of, but if you have a storm surge like Ian that is already crossed over some barrier islands, it's picked up a ton of debris and detritus, and there's boats and cars and docks and who knows what in that water. Having a physical complex barrier like a mangrove, it did wonders to protect people's houses in that storm, and it's not something that you're necessarily going to see the benefit from that gray infrastructure again. And another great benefit of mangroves is that they're self-replicating. They will continually spit out propagules, and those propagules will find purchase among the prop roots and the sediment and grow new mangroves, which is definitely not something you get from a seawall. So there's a lot of benefits. So just not to belabor the point, but going back through Ian, those of us that experienced it, those of us that experienced the aftermath all know that Ian was an absolute devastating storm. They said it was a Category 4. I think that depends when you when you measure and where you measure and who you're trying to appease with your measurement. But so I'll always put an about category for it when I'm talking about it. But we saw 13 foot of storm surge on Sanibel. Here's a heat map of where that storm surge came across Sanibel. And so you can see the darker spots are higher storm surge. The east end of that island was absolutely devastated. The entire island was washed over. And what we saw, though, was the areas that had natural buffer systems, had mangroves and wetlands and dunes in place, fared significantly better than the areas that were built right up on the beach and took the full brunt of that storm. So I think Ian really left us in a place where we have an opportunity now. We have an opportunity to take the learnings that we went through as a community in Ian and see what worked and what didn't, and apply those to our future vision of what Florida can be, and not just for us, but for our kids and our grandkids, and people who will hopefully be living here on into the future. I think that people really understand the benefit of a lot of these systems. We recently put a survey out to get a sense of how people feel about their natural systems on Sanibel specifically, and 77% of those respondents thought that mangroves had benefited them during Ian and their properties directly. So I think that it's not something that's escaping a lot of people, but it's just a matter of speaking up as a community with one voice to say that this is something that we value, and we know that if we protect nature, nature is going to protect us. So Eden Oak was a property that I'm sure some people in the room are familiar with. It was this red area, well, it still is this red area that's zoned of Shell Point Boulevard, right when you're heading out to...
And also some details about the potential purchase. Almost everything I say is going to be the words of our city council staff or county staff. So, are we moving ahead? We're not going anywhere here. 1 second.
Excuse me, can you just give us your name, because I don't know who you are.
Joseph Benezia.
Thank you.
So the technology worked for everybody else but me. There we go? Yes. All right, so just to confirm that our staff is in total agreement what we heard from Matt DePalis earlier. This is from, by the way, this comes from documents that were gotten through public records requests. Our Cape Coral Public Works Environmental Resources Manager General says removal of mangroves would weaken the buffering capacity of the mangrove area, which protects the city against storms. You're looking at a picture of Rose Garden Road during Hurricane Ian. You can see the level of flooding. As Matt said, it would have been far worse if we didn't have all those mangroves on the other side of the road. She went on to say that placing infrastructure, residences, businesses, and people in a wetland that has very poor drainage and in the coastal flood hazard zone has potentially extensive impacts financially, for livelihoods, or life in general. How many people, by the way, live on Southwest First Floor here? Okay. Rose Garden Road? El Dorado? So we suffered a lot of these issues. We don't want to go through that again, obviously. Specific, it's not moving again. No? The heck with it. I'm just going to talk to you a little bit here.
Okay.
So, studies have been done. As we see on one of our signs over there, after looking at a number of different hurricanes in Florida, a study done by the Nature Conservancy and the University of California determined that they reduced damages by 25.5%. During Hurricane Ian, 626,000 homes saw reduced damage. It reduced total damage by $1.5 billion. Let me go on. Matt spoke about Eden Oaks. One of the experts there was the county development manager. I want to bring to your attention what he said, because one of the things that the operator is saying is that the quality of the wetlands here are subpar, sort of inferior. What the county manager said was, hold on, Paul. Just because they might not be the highest quality according to some standards, doesn't mean that they don't protect the public, that they don't protect the land, and that they aren't the best thing to be there for Lee County. Same thing applies to these wetlands here. I do want you to see.
Tell me you got your cursor back.
Why am I on your presentation?
Nope, wrong way.
Keep going.
Keep going.
Yeah, that one. Oh,
All right. I never trusted technology. So, what's been happening, like I said, is a dialogue between the owner, its agents, and our city council. We have a comprehensive plan. There are goals, objectives, and policies in that plan. Our city council has asked the property owner to explain how this development is going to jive with objective 4.5, which is the peril of flood. In our comprehensive plan, it says the city shall take extra precautions to reduce the community's flood vulnerability in accordance with the State Peril of Flood Act. Our staff is asking them, how is that development going to reduce community flood vulnerability? They've been thinking about this for years. They have not adequately addressed this point as yet. Another policy, development within the Cape shall include principles, strategies, and engineering solutions that reduce flood risk in coastal areas which result from high tide events, storm surge, flash floods, etc. Once again, our city staff wants to know how this development is going to reduce flood risk, especially during storm surge, which is what affected us so much.
Excuse me, so are you saying that the city staff has asked?
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
okay.
And the
So
city
the question's been
staff,
asked.
yes, the city staff will not give this a thumbs up until that question and similar questions are satisfactorily answered, which is why I think they're doing a pretty darn good job for us.
But that's the city staff, not the city council.
No,
that's not the
Staff. I'm talking about the
I
staff.
apologize.
That's okay.
I'm sorry.
I do want you to know, in case you don't, that a recent study found that Cape Coral was one of the top 9 cities in the nation most at risk from future storms. So it's not if we're going to get another Hurricane Ian, it's when we're going to get another Hurricane Ian. I want to talk about environmental impacts. It's a wildlife haven in those wetlands. There are bobcats and coyotes and armadillos and raccoons and bobcats, yes indeed. There are threatened species, threatened fish. There have been bald eagles nesting over there. There, in fact, evidence of a panther being back there at times and bear being back. So, super important. What our city council wants to know from them, and I'll just read a couple of these things. The property owner has provided an environmental report, and this is a response to at least that report. Given the extent and sensitivity of this project, staff recommends providing a more thorough assessment. The only field-based survey pertains to gopher tortoises in the more upland area, and no management plan was provided. It is expected that other species utilize the property and management plans should be incorporated into the application for those present. Impact to the shoreline by boardwalks should incorporate a field-based study for sea turtle nesting potential. The removal of available uplands from a currently complete ecosystem encompassing complementary functions from uplands to salt marshes to wetlands to surface waters, both fresh and salt water, must be evaluated and discussed, and impacts for mitigation provided. Our staff thinks that their environmental report is not good enough, basically. Furthermore, they say that the wetlands exhibit is not field-based, but aerial-based, and is not adequate given the scope and sensitivity of this project. Apparently, what they provided was done from up here. It wasn't done from on the ground. According to our staff, not good enough. I don't think we need to have any slides to note that if this is built, it's going to significantly impact the character of Rotary Park. It's a super popular park. The character is going to be compromised. People go there to get away from the noise and the traffic and the buildings. If you're in the park, you're going to be hearing lots of traffic. Instead of just looking at the trees and the sky, you're going to be looking at these buildings. The development, this development is opposed by our Parks and Recreation Director. Paul spoke about that road going through the conservation easement and through part of the city land, Rotary Park. That road actually goes over a hot spot for the critically endangered small-tooth sawfish. According to our staff, they're wondering, why are we even proceeding working on this right now? Because if the DEP does not approve that roadway where it's proposed, they're going to have to come up with a different entrance, which means they're going to have to come up with a different footprint on the wetlands. So why are we bothering to work on these things until something like this is settled? What else do we need to know? Our public utilities manager says the area immediately north is built out and the mains were sized accordingly. The proposed development would likely require extensive off-site infrastructure upgrades to serve that level of density that they are proposing. So we're talking about a lot of upheaval on our streets that we would be listening to for years. Our staff also notes that they don't really say much about utility lines and that sort of thing, which again would impact the wetlands. So bottom line, we want the city to pursue purchase of this property. It is totally within the city goals and objectives. The city will develop and maintain priorities for the acquisition for preservation of vulnerable coastal ecological communities and acquire this land. There are a bunch of goals and objectives and policies I could read to you, but the point is preserving this land, purchasing this land is all in alignment with our comprehensive city plan.
That document online somewhere.
It can be. And I just want to introduce Ruth Haig. She has, I hope you read her article in the Breeze the other day. It was excellent. And you just want to take a couple of minutes to tell us about upcoming events and activities that you would want to know about.
I just wanted to, first of all, introduce myself for those of you who don't know me, who may be down here snowbird season. My name is Ruth Haig, and I operate primarily as the communications coordinator for Protect Our Wetlands here in Cape Coral. And we want to thank you all for being out here. I see so much passion, and I am a very passionate person. I only put my time and energy and money and efforts towards something I feel very, very passionate about, and I'm here today because of that, as all of you are, and I think that puts us all in the same boat, and it's very refreshing to see so many people care. And how can you not? I mean, looking at these pictures, you know, make sure you stop and take a look at those pictures on your way out the door, because every time I see them, it's just, you know, some of those are my own pictures. You know, we flooded quite significantly. So this is all very, very important, and like I said to many of you before, you know, we will be calling on you when it's time. We have these call to action events, and so far, when we have done so, you've shown up, I mean, in droves, so thank you for that. Really makes you feel like you're part of a community and part of something that makes a difference. So I appreciate all of your time, and I appreciate all your comments that come in on the website. We read them all, and so we really appreciate all of that. As we move forward in this, as you know, and as you saw with this timeline, this is all pretty new. This is a group of residents that got together basically, for the most part of the summer and said, hey, we got to do more. And so here we are. We're building on that. It takes time, it takes energy, it takes money, it takes resources. So we're doing our very best with the resources we have, and we appreciate every single one of you. And all of your, we're the voices here, and we're the coordinators, but this is us. This is us as a community. So you all have an equal voice. So all of our voices together is a very, very powerful weapon and message. Moving forward, I would ask that you pass along this information to all of your neighbors who are now coming down for snowbird season. We've got a lot of new people, a lot of new faces. People have never even heard, they're asking questions about the signs. As we continue to move forward, we will be having booths at the Burring Owl Festival in February the 24th, mark the calendar. Put on by Cape Coral Friends of Wildlife, or I think we're going to be sitting right next to the Cape Coral Friends of Wildlife. Also, we will be participating this year in the Arts Festival downtown. That's January